There's a hidden risk of being fully booked where your pipeline slowly drains that nobody warns you about. Because here's what's frustrating. Most service business owners know they have a pipeline problem. They've even tried to fix it, but most of the advice out there that they get actually makes the problem worse. So they reach out to contacts, check in with referrals, ask for warm introductions, go to events, post more content, and try to stay top of mind. And even with doing all of that, their pipeline still feels unstable. And a lot of the advice out there further reinforces the feast and famine cycle, not break it. Because they ignore the fundamentals that make these tactics work in the first place. So I want to walk through 3 strategies that actually gets handed out like gospel in the service business world and show you exactly where and why they break. Now, just to be clear, this isn't to bash these type of advice because they are solid. It's about understanding why the right advice still fails in the wrong context so you can actually build something that works and lasts. Now, the most common advice you'll hear is just be more consistent with your marketing, right? Or with your content or whatever it is that you're actually doing to get clients. Show up on social media, post every day, send weekly newsletters, and build an audience. And look, consistency does matter. I'm not arguing that. However, there are 2 problems with this particular advice. Number 1 is that you can be consistent doing the wrong things. So for example, I have a client that's been posting content on LinkedIn for months with absolutely 0 results. And when we started working together, all I did was make a simple positioning shift, and his next 2 posts after that landed him 3 clients in the space of 30 days. Problem number 2 with this advice is that consistency is a long game, especially when we're talking about creating and posting content. It typically takes anywhere between 3 to 6 months of consistent posting for you to actually see any type of impact on your pipeline and revenue. So when someone has a pipeline problem today, when they're staring at their pipeline and they realize in the next 60 days it's about to go completely dry, telling someone to just be consistent with posting is like telling someone that's thirsty now to go outside and wait for rain to fall. This is one of the reasons why we implemented a step in the last year in our entire sales process where we actually diagnose a prospect's problem or need before we make any sort of recommendations to them. Because what we've realized is that for some clients, pipeline first is the best move. For others, it may be content. For others, it may be positioning. But you won't know. So making any sort of recommendation without first understanding the underlying root cause of why they're not getting results is pretty immature and premature. The second popular but not so effective advice is just to do outreach sprints. Things slowing down in your business? Just reach out to 50 people this week. Send DMs, email past clients, attend more networking events, run ads, and then boom, suddenly you have a slew of leads coming in your pipeline. And in a sense, it can work in the short term. I mean, a focus sprint can generate activity right now. But here's the problem. An outreach sprint when pipeline is dry makes you very reactive. And when you're very reactive, it means that you're doing things out of desperation to actually bring in new business. Which means you're approaching potential clients from a place of need and not a place of value that you can deliver to them. And that energy of desperation comes across as very off-putting and it's a repellent to potential clients. And people can feel it in your messages, in your emails, when you're on the call with them. Trust me, potential clients can actually feel it. A prospect that receives an outreach message from someone who doesn't even need their business is a completely different energy than someone who actually reaches out to them because their calendar's empty and they need to fill it right now. So I had a prospect who this actually happened to. So he had reached out to me for us to potentially work together. But 2 weeks before our actual call, he messaged me and said he's no longer going to move forward with our engagement. So a bit curious, I decided to ask him why. He said that he had been running ads, he's been getting a lot of leads, getting a lot of clients, and his workload is at capacity. So he doesn't necessarily see the need to start creating content to build his authority. 8 months later, I heard that he had to shut down his service business because he was no longer getting clients consistently and there wasn't enough cash flow coming in to keep the business afloat. And this is just one of those things where people think that doing more of a particular activity will actually help them. But just because you have current demand from the activities that you're doing, it doesn't necessarily equate to consistent demand. So the idea is to have a system that consistently and predictably creates demand first of all, bring in qualified leads and fill your pipeline with those qualified leads that you can then convert to clients. So in a sense, all of this activity and outreach actually does work. But the problem is that sprints don't fix things that are systematically and structurally wrong with your business. It just exhausts you and your pipeline, and then afterwards you're literally back to square one where you began. So the third advice that sounds good in theory but can actually work against you is one that we've been talking about for weeks now, and that's relying too heavily on referrals. It's the one that can feel the most comfortable and therefore can actually be the most dangerous. Referrals are a great starting point when you're just starting out building your business, but it's actually not the best when it comes to scaling your business. And that's because you have almost no control over the timing, the volume, or the quantity of leads that actually are referred to you. You cannot control when someone thinks of you. You cannot control how many introductions happen this month versus next month. And you cannot control whether the person being referred to you is a good fit, they're ready to buy, or if they're even serious. So when your pipeline is mostly referral dependent, it means that you're relying on someone else remembering to mention you at the right moment to the right person. So you're basically the supporting cast member in someone else's story, because you're not the main character that determines the direction of your own story and your business. And that's why being referral dependent creates feast and famine cycles if you're using it as your primary growth engine. When they're flowing, everything feels easy. When they're not flowing, then everything feels harder. So as one accounting firm owner puts it, last year they got a lot of referrals for their tax services. So that person rightly automatically assumed that because they got a lot of business for their tax services, it meant that when tax season ended, those same clients would either continue to be clients or refer others for ongoing bookkeeping services throughout the rest of the year. But the reality of what happened is that after tax season ended, they barely got any new clients, barely got any new business, barely got any new referrals. So they took a significant hit to their actual cash flow. So after learning from last year's lesson, this year they decided that they're going to put systems in place that they control to actually create and capture demand. So here's the biggest takeaway from this. The current way fails because it creates motion but also delivers temporary results. It's not based and built on a system that can predictably and consistently create demand and pipeline for your business. Referrals create spikes in your pipeline. Relationship maintenance creates activity, but consistency in the wrong thing actually creates the illusion of progress and momentum. But neither one of these actually gives you a predictable pipeline, which is what you really want. So the question you're probably asking is, if the old way is unstable, then what does the better way that actually works look like? It's a system that creates demand and pipeline consistently by generating qualified leads and high-value clients without you having to chase referrals. It's the same system that allowed Sarah, a compliance business risk owner, to hit her quarterly revenue targets in just 30 days. And in case you're wondering, it actually is a lot simpler than you think, but it requires you to make a belief and mindset shift that most people tend to resist. And I break it down in the next video. So if this resonated with you, remember to subscribe. And if you're ready, click here to watch the next video on the better way that can help you to build a predictable and consistent pipeline for your business.